The market has no mercy for your hope and no sympathy for your fear. Every trader knows that feeling, staring at a chart that's moving against you, heart pounding, eyes locked, waiting for something to change. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself the bounce is coming. You hope, and that's the beginning of your undoing. But here's the truth Livermore learned long before any of us. Hope and fear are two sides of the same emotional coin, and both will bankrupt the undisciplined mind. This is not a story about technical indicators or secret systems. This is a story about the inner war every trader fights, between wanting to believe and needing to accept, between holding on and letting go. And no one understood that war better than Jesse Livermore, the man who made and lost several fortunes in the early 1900s, not because he lacked skill, but because he was human. He called it the battle within. Livermore once said, "The human side of every person is the greatest enemy of the average investor." That line isn't theory, it's blood-earned wisdom, because he lived through both, the euphoria of being right and the devastation of being emotionally trapped. I've seen it too, traders holding losing positions out of hope and selling winners out of fear. The cruel irony? Both emotions pretend to protect you. Hope says, don't take the loss. Fear says, don't lose what's left. And together, they whisper you right into destruction. This is the paradox Livermore spent a lifetime decoding, that survival in markets isn't about predicting moves, it's about mastering emotions. So tonight, we enter that psychological battlefield, not Wall Street, not the pit, but the mind of a trader, the place where every decision is born, where every fortune begins or ends. Because if you can't control the battle between hope and fear, you're not trading the market, you're being traded by it. So I ask you, when you see a trade turning red, what do you feel first, hope or fear? Comment below, because this story isn't about charts, it's about you. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into this invisible war, the inner conflict between what we know and what we feel, the paradox every trader lives through and few ever master. Every trader fights two markets, the one outside and the one within. That's the paradox. Because on the screen, prices move with perfect logic, supply and demand, volume and momentum. But in your mind, logic is the first casualty. You see, trading is supposed to be rational, yet the moment real money's on the line, logic surrenders to emotion. And nowhere is that more visible than in the war between hope and fear. Hope is seductive. It whispers, hold on, it'll turn around. Fear, meanwhile, screams, sell now, save yourself. And the cruel joke is, both are trying to keep you safe. Hope saves your ego, fear saves your capital. But rarely do they align. Livermore once wrote that the market doesn't beat you, it just reveals you. When prices rise, it reveals your greed. When they fall, it reveals your fear. When nothing happens, it exposes your impatience. And the most dangerous time of all, when hope and fear switch places. Imagine you're in a losing trade. Hope keeps you there, telling you the trend will reverse, that the pain will fade. You stare at the screen like it owes you an apology. But when you're in a winning trade, suddenly fear takes over. Fear of losing what you've gained, fear of being wrong, fear of the market turning. So you close too early. That's the paradox. We fear profits and hope for losses. It's backward, it's irrational, and yet it's human. Livermore understood this long before modern psychology did. He said, the market never gave me what I wanted when I wanted it. Because the market's purpose isn't to reward your desire, it's to test your discipline. Hope is emotional time travel. You project into the future, imagining things getting better. Fear is emotional paralysis. You anchor to the past, haunted by what you've already lost. Both keep you from doing what must be done in the present. When Livermore made his greatest fortunes, it wasn't because he had secret information. It was because he had emotional clarity. He knew when to sit still. He knew when the voice in his head was not truth, but temptation. And that's what most traders never master, the ability to act not from feeling, but from principle. Livermore believed that every successful trader must become a philosopher, because to win consistently, you must understand human nature, not others first, but your own. Hope and fear are not enemies, they're tools, but only if you wield them consciously. Hope is the seed of vision. It helps you hold a position with conviction when logic aligns. Fear is the shield. It keeps your losses small when the tide turns. But when either emotion takes control, they turn from tools into traps. That's the paradox of trading. You need both emotions to survive, but you must never let either one drive. And that's the lesson every trader eventually learns the hard way. So ask yourself, when the market moves against you, which emotion wins the battle inside your head? Hope or fear? Comment your answer, because recognizing it is the first step to controlling it. Next, we'll dive into the psychological trap, how this internal battle becomes a cycle of self-sabotage that even Jesse Livermore himself couldn't always escape. The most dangerous trades are not the ones you lose money on, they're the ones that teach you the wrong lesson. That's how the trap begins. One small win against the odds, one lucky escape, and suddenly you start believing that hope works, that patience will always save you. You start confusing emotional endurance with strategic discipline, but the market has a way of rewarding your weakness just long enough to make you addicted to it. And that's where most traders, even Jesse Livermore, fall into the cycle of emotional reinforcement. You take a loss, it hurts, you tell yourself it's temporary, you hold, you hope, and maybe, just maybe, it reverses. The relief feels euphoric, that dopamine hit is intoxicating, you survived, you were right after all. So what happens the next time? You hold again, but this time it doesn't reverse. And now your brain can't tell the difference between discipline and denial. That's the psychological trap. Hope rewarded once becomes hope repeated. Livermore knew this all too well. He wrote in his notes that the worst losses came not from bad trades, but from emotional conditioning, from learning that breaking your own rules sometimes worked. He called it the most dangerous form of victory. And on the other side of hope lies fear, a darker, quieter trap. Because after one devastating loss, you promise yourself never again. You hesitate, you second guess, you see opportunity but freeze, haunted by memory. That's fear, not protecting you, but paralyzing you. So you swing between two extremes. Hope keeps you in too long, fear keeps you out too soon. And both destroy consistency, the only true edge a trader ever has. This is where Livermore's genius wasn't just in speculation, but in self-observation. He wrote down every emotional pattern he noticed. He saw that every failed trader shared one flaw: emotional inconsistency disguised as intuition. You convince yourself you're feeling the market, when really you're just reacting to your own feelings. You call it instinct, but it's memory. You call it conviction, but it's ego. Livermore understood that the market is a mirror. Every tick reflects not what you know, but who you are. And until you face that reflection, the market will keep replaying your lessons, louder each time. This is the trap. You begin trading for emotional relief instead of strategic alignment. You start holding losers to avoid pain, and cutting winners to avoid regret. It feels like you're managing risk, but really you're managing discomfort. That's why Livermore said, "A loss never bothers me after I take it. I forget it overnight." But being wrong, not taking the loss, that is what does damage to the pocketbook and the soul. Because the longer you resist emotional pain, the deeper the psychological scar becomes. It's not the loss that ruins you, it's the refusal to accept it. So here's the truth. Hope and fear aren't enemies. They're feedback. They're signals from your subconscious warning you where your discipline breaks down. But when you let those signals steer your trades, the loop begins, and the market will play that loop until you either learn or lose. So, trader to trader, I'll ask you this. Have you ever stayed in a losing position just to avoid admitting defeat? Did hope save you, or did it cost you? Comment below, because that moment defines the kind of trader you truly are. Next, we'll step into Livermore's perspective, how he dissected this emotional war and discovered the mental discipline that separated professionals from prey. Discipline is not a rulebook. It's a state of mind. Jesse Livermore. When Livermore spoke about discipline, he wasn't talking about routine or rigidity. He was talking about self-command, the rare mental strength to think clearly when every cell in your body is screaming to do the opposite. He understood something that most traders never grasp. Hope and fear can't be eliminated, they must be mastered. They're instincts, ancient survival tools. But in the market, those same instincts turn fatal. Livermore wrote that his greatest challenge wasn't the market itself, it was himself in the market. He said, "It was never my thinking that made the big money, it was always my sitting." But sitting wasn't about patience alone, it was about mental silence. The ability to endure the storm of emotion without surrendering to it. He trained himself to watch price movements the way a scientist watches an experiment, without taking them personally. Because every tick, every fluctuation, was not proof or punishment, it was information. Livermore's journals reveal that he approached trading as psychological warfare. He understood that the market's only true function was to test the limits of his discipline. He believed that every moment of temptation, to act, to hope, to fear, was the market's way of asking, are you in control or are you reacting? That's the secret he lived by. Control is not about predicting what happens next. Control is about knowing how you'll respond no matter what happens. Livermore's method was ruthless in its simplicity. He followed 3 iron rules. Cut losses immediately. Hope has no place in a losing position. Let winners run. Fear must never interrupt success. Sit tight when right. Discipline is the art of not interfering with your own profits. He once said, "Men who can both be right and sit tight are uncommon. I found it one of the hardest things to learn." And that's the essence of Livermore's wisdom, that mastery is not in the act of trading, but in the act of not trading when emotion demands it. Modern traders often misunderstand what discipline really means. They think it's about effort, or restriction, or control over external conditions. But Livermore saw it differently. He believed discipline was freedom, freedom from emotional chaos. Because once your mind is quiet, the market's noise can't hurt you anymore. Livermore had a ritual. When emotions ran high, he'd leave his office. He'd walk the streets of New York, hands in his pockets, letting the city's rhythm drown out the noise of the ticker. He once said he made his best decisions away from the market, never inside it. That's because clarity doesn't come from staring at the screen. It comes from stepping back far enough to see the truth. And the truth is, every trade is a mirror. Every decision reflects whether you are guided by principle or by impulse. Livermore's discipline wasn't about perfection, it was about recognition. He knew he couldn't eliminate emotion, he could only recognize it fast enough to keep it from taking control. That's why his legacy still matters, because his wisdom wasn't bound by time. Markets evolve, technology changes, but human emotion, it's eternal. So when you're staring at that red candle, your heart pounding, your cursor trembling over the close button, remember Livermore. Remember that he faced the same storm a century ago and realized something timeless. The market is never wrong, only your emotions are. In the next section, we'll bring this battle into the modern world through the story of a trader who faced the same inner war and discovered, through pain, what Livermore meant by discipline. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, when you lose control in trading, which emotion takes over first, hope or fear?
The charts don't lie, but our emotions do, every single day. Let me tell you about a trader I once knew. His name was Adrian, a quiet, methodical man, the kind who always had a plan, always double-checked his entries, always believed that discipline was his strength. But like every trader before him, Adrian eventually met his reflection in the market's mirror. It began during a rally. He'd bought a tech stock that shot up faster than he expected. Within days, it was up 30%. He told himself he'd trail his stop, lock in profit, let it breathe. But then came the pullback. Sharp, sudden, brutal. One red candle turned into 2, then 3. And that's when the 2 voices appeared. Hope said, "This is just a dip, it'll recover." Fear said, "Get out before it's all gone." And Adrian, trapped between them, froze. He watched as the price slipped past his stop. He justified it, moved it lower, told himself he was being patient. The irony? In that moment, patience wasn't discipline, it was denial. Hope kept him in the trade long after logic had left. He watched his unrealized profit evaporate and then turn red. But the pain wasn't just financial, it was psychological. He didn't want to be wrong. He didn't want to admit that his perfect plan had failed. So he did what so many of us have done. He held on, not because it made sense, but because he couldn't stand the feeling of loss. And when the stock fell another 10%, something changed. Fear finally took the wheel. He panicked, sold into weakness, only to watch, days later, as the price rebounded and soared back to where it started. That's the cruel rhythm of this game. Hope makes you hold your losses, fear makes you cut your winners, and both emotions, in their extremes, destroy your balance. Adrian stared at his charts that night, exhausted, confused. He wasn't angry at the market, he was angry at himself. That's when he stumbled upon Jesse Livermore's writings. He read one line that hit him like a confession written a century earlier. The big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. But waiting, Livermore's kind of waiting, wasn't about sitting in a losing trade. It was about waiting for clarity, not comfort. It was about having the discipline to act only when emotion was silent. Adrian realized he'd been playing two games at once, one with the market and one with himself, and he was losing the second far more often than the first. So he began to do something most traders never have the courage to do. He started keeping an emotional journal. Not just trade setups, but feelings. Every time he hesitated, every time he hoped, every time he feared, he wrote it down. And over time, he saw the pattern. It wasn't about entries or exits. It was about the moments in between, the hesitation, the justification, the whisper of hope, and the scream of fear. He began to treat emotion like a market indicator, one that signaled not when to buy or sell, but when to step back. Adrian still loses trades, but he doesn't lose himself in them anymore. He doesn't let hope become denial. He doesn't let fear become panic. He's learned what Livermore meant when he said, "The market never forgives carelessness." And that's the difference between an amateur and a professional. Professionals don't eliminate emotion. They observe it, measure it, and wait it out. Because in the end, trading discipline isn't about fighting emotion. It's about learning to stay calm inside the storm. In the next section, we'll descend into the emotional low point, that dark, silent moment every trader faces when they've lost faith, lost focus, and must decide whether to quit or evolve. It's the place Jesse Livermore himself knew all too well. Before we continue, tell me honestly, when your plan fails, do you rewrite your system or do you start blaming yourself? Comment your truth, because every trader has stood in Adrian's shoes at least once.
There comes a moment in every trader's life when the market stops testing your system and starts testing your soul. For Jesse Livermore, that moment came many times. For every fortune he built, he faced an equally devastating fall. And in those moments, he didn't just lose money, he lost faith in himself. Imagine this. You've spent months studying patterns, testing setups, fine-tuning your entries. Then, in a single week, the market strips it all away. You're not just watching numbers fade, you're watching belief evaporate. You stop asking, "What went wrong?" and start whispering, "What's wrong with me?" That's the trader's breaking point, when the line between identity and outcome disappears. Livermore knew that feeling better than anyone. He wrote that after his biggest losses, the worst pain wasn't financial, it was psychological exhaustion. He said, "I had lost faith in myself, and that is the most dangerous condition of all. Because once you lose that, no chart can save you." He'd isolate himself, leave the exchange, walk the streets in silence, his hands deep in his coat pockets, replaying every decision in his mind. But he didn't wallow, he observed. He studied the emotional collapse the same way he studied market behavior. He realized that his despair wasn't caused by the loss itself, but by the attachment, the illusion of control he thought he had. The market hadn't betrayed him, his expectations had. Every trader reaches that point eventually, where the charts blur, the strategies fade, and you're left alone with one haunting question. Can I still trust myself? It's a lonely, dangerous question, because this is where most quit. They walk away, not because they're broke, but because they're mentally bankrupt. But Livermore, and the few who endure, found something different in that darkness. They found truth. He discovered that discipline wasn't about strength. It was about surrender, not to the market, but to reality, to the fact that losses are not failures, they're feedback, to the fact that emotion isn't weakness, it's information. He realized that hope and fear only exist when you resist truth. When you deny what's in front of you, you suffer. But when you accept it, you gain power. That's when Livermore began to rebuild, not his portfolio, but his mindset. He stripped away everything, the noise, the pride, the stories he told himself, until all that remained was clarity. He wrote, "A man must believe in himself and his judgment if he expects to make a living at this game. Notice, he didn't say believe in being right. He said believe in judgment. That's a belief in process, not outcome. And that's where every trader finds their rebirth. The emotional low point is not your end. It's your initiation. It's the moment the market stops being your opponent and becomes your teacher. Because after you've been broken by hope and fear, only then can you understand what Livermore meant by mental discipline. It's not about never feeling again. It's about never letting those feelings decide for you. So when you're sitting in front of your screen, staring at a loss that cuts deep, remember this: you're not failing, you're being refined. The market isn't punishing you, it's preparing you. And that's the moment Livermore found his greatest strength. Not in the rallies, not in the profits, but in the quiet humility of losing everything and learning who he really was. Next, we reach the conclusion, the lesson Livermore left behind for all of us, a reflection on how to walk through this emotional battlefield without losing your center, a final truth every trader must face to survive the game. Before we go there, tell me in the comments, have you ever reached that point of doubt when you questioned if you should keep trading? Share it below, because your story might be another trader's turning point.
Hope and fear, the twin architects of every trader's rise and fall. For Jesse Livermore, these weren't abstract emotions. They were living forces, the ghosts that walked beside him on every trade, whispering in both victory and despair. He learned, often through agony, that the market isn't a contest of prediction, it's a contest of psychological endurance. He said, "After spending many years in Wall Street and after making and losing millions of dollars, I want to tell you this. It was never my thinking that made the big money. It was always my sitting." But when he said sitting, he didn't mean waiting idly. He meant sitting with emotion, sitting with fear without acting on it, sitting with hope without clinging to it. He meant self-command. Because at its core, trading is not about predicting markets. It's about knowing yourself deeply enough that no candle, no chart, no headline can pull you out of that inner center. Livermore called it mental poise, a stillness earned through experience. Not the absence of emotion, but mastery over it. That's what separates the professional from the crowd. Not knowledge, not tools, not timing, but equanimity. Modern traders chase systems, indicators, and strategies. But the truth is, most don't need a new method. They need a new mind. Because every chart setup, no matter how perfect, collapses the moment fear interferes. And every recovery trade spirals when hope takes the wheel. The great paradox is this: the less you need to win, the more clearly you see the market. The less you fear losing, the less you'll lose. Livermore's discipline wasn't cold, it was conscious. He felt every emotion, but he refused to be ruled by any. That's why he could endure what most couldn't. He didn't avoid the storm, he learned how to stand still within it. So as you listen to this, wherever you are, whether you're sitting in front of 10 screens or scrolling through your phone, remember, the market isn't out to break you. It's out to reveal you, to show you what you believe, what you fear, and how much control you truly have over yourself. Every trader is a reflection of their own psychology. And the moment you understand that, the moment you stop blaming and start observing, that's when the real game begins. Because in the end, hope and fear aren't your enemies, they're your compass. They show you where you're still attached, where you still resist, where you still have something left to master. Livermore's greatest lesson wasn't about money, it was about awareness. He showed us that trading isn't just a profession, it's a spiritual mirror. Every loss, every win, every hesitation is a lesson in who we are becoming. So I'll leave you with this. When the next trade turns red, when your pulse quickens and the whispers begin, stop, breathe. Ask yourself not, what is the market doing, but what am I feeling and why? That single question can save you more money, more pain, and more years than any trading system ever could. Because in the end, this isn't the stock market, it's the discipline game. If this spoke to you, comment below. What's stronger in your trading, hope or fear? Let's talk about it. And remember, the market tests everyone, but discipline always wins.